Have you ever wondered what you would do if following the rules meant watching an innocent person die? Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional stories filled with suspense, courage, and unforgettable twists, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves powerful storytelling. Your support helps us bring you more original stories every week. The rain had been falling for hours. Water covered the hospital parking lot. Ambulance lights reflected across the wet pavement, and the emergency room was already overflowing with patients. Every bed was full. Every nurse was moving as fast as possible. Doctors hurried from one room to another without stopping to rest. Emily Carter had worked in emergency medicine for nearly 12 years. She had learned something that no medical textbook could ever teach. Machines could measure a heartbeat. Computers could display blood pressure. Laboratory tests could reveal hidden diseases. But sometimes, the patient's body spoke long before any machine did. That night, Emily could feel something was wrong before she even touched the next patient. The ambulance doors opened. Two paramedics rushed inside with an older man lying silently on a stretcher. No identificación. No wallet. No phone. No family. Only an old waterproof jacket soaked by the rain. Male. Around 70 years old. One paramedic reported while pushing the stretcher toward Trauma Room 8. Found unconscious near an abandoned railway station. No witnesses. Blood pressure keeps dropping. Breathing is getting weaker. Emily immediately stepped beside the stretcher. She noticed something unusual. The man's clothes looked old. His boots were scratched. His beard had not been trimmed for weeks. Yet his hands were surprisingly clean. Not soft. Strong. Disciplined. The fingertips carried old scars. His posture, even while unconscious, seemed controlled. She had seen hands like these before. Years earlier. During humanitarian medical missions overseas. These were not the hands of someone who had simply lived on the streets. These were the hands of someone who had survived difficult places. Dr. Daniel Brooks entered the room while reading the electronic chart. Unknown male, he said calmly. Possible dehydration. Low blood pressure. Let's begin with fluids and routine blood work. Emily looked at the patient again. Something didn't fit. She gently pressed the left side of his abdomen. The muscles tightened instantly. Not because he was awake. Because his body was protecting itself. She tried again. The same reaction. She slowly removed the wet blanket covering him. No obvious wounds. No fresh bruises. But the left side of his stomach looked slightly swollen. Very slightly. Enough that most people would ignore it. Emily didn't. Doctor, she said quietly. I think we should order an emergency CT scan. Dr. Brooks barely looked up. Based on what? His abdomen is guarding. He may have internal bleeding. The doctor shook his head. He probably collapsed because of dehydration. Emily remained calm. His blood pressure keeps falling. So does everyone's when they're dehydrated. She wanted to argue. Instead, she checked the monitor again. 98/62. Lower than before. The patient suddenly opened his eyes. Only for a second. His gray eyes looked directly at Emily. There was no confusion. No panique. Only awareness. He slowly raised one trembling hand. His fingers stopped halfway, as though trying to point toward something. Then his arm fell back onto the bed. Emily leaned closer. My name is Emily. Can you hear me? The man's lips barely moved. She couldn't understand. She bent even closer. Only two whispered words escaped. Don't trust. Before she could ask another question, he lost consciousness again. Emily looked toward the monitor. His heartbeat was becoming faster. His breathing shallower. None of it matched simple dehydration. Outside the room, nurses continued running through crowded hallways. Phones rang endlessly. Wheelchairs rolled across polished floors. Somewhere nearby, a child cried. Another ambulance arrived. The emergency department never stopped. Emily stepped outside and found Dr. Brooks speaking with another physician. He spoke. What did he say? I couldn't hear everything. But something is seriously wrong. Dr. Brooks sighed. We'll wait for the blood tests. We don't have enough evidence for imaging. Emily stared at him. Sometimes waiting saved resources. Sometimes waiting cost lives. She returned to the bedside. The patient's skin felt colder now. His pulse was weaker. She checked his abdomen once more. The swelling had increased. Only a little. But enough. She knew what her instincts were telling her. She had ignored that feeling only once in her career. Years ago. She had trusted normal test results instead of what she saw with her own eyes. The patient had died 3 hours later from internal bleeding. She had promised herself never to make that mistake again. Not ever. She quietly called another experienced nurse. Sophia. The older nurse entered the room. What do you see? Emily pointed toward the patient's abdomen. Sophia examined him carefully. After several silent seconds she looked up. I see it. You do. Sophia nodded. He needs imaging. Immediately. Emily finally felt less alone. But convincing the doctor would be much harder than convincing another nurse. She looked once more at the mysterious stranger. Who was he? Why had someone left him alone in the rain? And what exactly had he tried to warn her about before losing consciousness again? Emily stood quietly beside the hospital bed while the heart monitor continued its steady beeping. Every second felt longer than the last. The mysterious man remained unconscious, but his condition was changing. Sophia checked his blood pressure again. 92/58. Emily looked at the screen. It dropped again. Sophia nodded. We can't keep waiting. Emily walked quickly toward the nurse's station. Dr. Daniel Brooks was reviewing another patient's chart. Doctor, his pressure is still falling. I know. He needs a CT scan. We're waiting for the blood work. Emily kept her voice calm. If he's bleeding internally, blood tests may still look normal. The doctor sighed. We've already discussed this. Emily wanted to argue again. Instead, she returned to trauma room 8. The patient suddenly moved. His breathing became faster. His fingers twitched against the blanket. Emily leaned closer. Can you hear me? His eyes slowly opened. This time they stayed open for several seconds. He looked directly at her. His expression wasn't frightened. It was focused. Almost as if he was trying to recognize her. He slowly whispered, window. Emily looked toward the large emergency room window. Rain continued falling outside. Nothing unusual. She turned back. What about the window? His lips barely moved. There. Watching. Before Emily could ask another question, his eyes closed again. A cold feeling ran through her. She walked to the window. Outside, ambulances continued arriving. Visitors hurried through the rain carrying umbrellas. Everything looked normal. Or perhaps too normal. Sophia joined her. What happened? He said someone was watching. Sophia looked outside. I don't see anyone. Neither do I. Just then, a security guard entered the emergency department. Excuse me. Someone asked if an unidentified elderly man had been brought here tonight. Emily's attention sharpened. Who asked? He didn't give his name. What did he look like? The guard thought for a moment. Black coat. Baseball cap. Sunglasses. Emily frowned. At night? The guard nodded. That's why I remembered him. Did he leave? He walked away when I said I couldn't give patient information. Emily exchanged a quick glance with Sophia. Neither of them said a word. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. A few minutes later, the laboratory results arrived. Dr. Brooks reviewed them. Hemoglobin looks acceptable. Electrolytes slightly abnormal. No obvious emergency. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. Doctor. The numbers don't explain how fast he's getting worse. Before he could answer, the blood pressure alarm sounded again. Sophia checked it manually. 86/53. Dr. Brooks finally looked concerned. Emily spoke firmly. We're running out of time. He stared at the monitor for several seconds. Then finally nodded. Fine. We'll order the CT. Emily immediately called radiology. But the answer wasn't what she expected. The scanner is occupied. How long? At least 30 minutes. Emily closed her eyes. 30 minutes. The patient might not have 30 minutes. She hurried back into the room. The man's skin had become pale. Tiny drops of sweat covered his forehead. His breathing was shallow. Sophia started another 4-line. Emily gently held the patient's hand. "Stay with us. You've made it this far." The man's fingers squeezed hers. "Only slightly. But enough." He whispered again. "This wasn't an accident." Emily froze. "What wasn't?" His breathing became weaker. "They wanted." The sentence never finished. The monitor suddenly changed. His heart rate jumped. 100, 110, 120. Sophia looked up. "This isn't good." Emily pressed the emergency button. Within seconds, doctors and nurses rushed into the room. Dr. Brooks examined the patient. The abdomen looked much larger now. His expression changed immediately. "Prepare for emergency imaging." Emily didn't say a word. She simply helped move the patient onto the transport stretcher. As they rushed through the hallway, every second mattered. Hospital staff moved aside. The elevator doors opened. The stretcher rolled inside. Emily stayed beside the patient. Halfway to radiology, the elevator suddenly stopped. Everyone looked at the display. Another emergency transport had priority. The doors remained closed. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Emily felt her heartbeat pounding. Finally, the elevator moved again. When they reached radiology, the CT team was already waiting. The patient was transferred onto the scanning table. Emily stood behind the protective glass with Dr. Brooks. The first images appeared. The radiologist became silent. Then she zoomed in. There. Everyone looked. A large pocket of blood surrounded the patient's spleen. Another image appeared. Then another. The bleeding was severe. The radiologist spoke quietly. "Massive internal hemorrhage. He needs surgery immediately." Dr. Brooks slowly lowered his head. Emily didn't say anything. There was no time for blame. Only action. The surgical team was called. Within moments, the patient was racing toward the operating room. As they reached the hallway, a black government SUV stopped outside the emergency entrance. 4 serious-looking men stepped out. None of them wore military uniforms. But their movements were precise. Professional. One woman showed identification to hospital security. Within seconds, they were escorted inside. The team leader approached the reception desk. "We're looking for an unidentified male admitted within the last hour." The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, I can't release." The woman calmly placed another identification card on the desk. Everything changed. Security immediately contacted hospital administration. Emily watched from the end of the hallway. Who were these people? And why were they searching for the same man? Before anyone could answer, the operating room doors closed. The red surgery light turned on. Emily could only hope they had arrived in time. Emily stood outside the operating room, staring at the bright red light above the doors. Inside, surgeons were fighting to save a man whose name no one even knew. Every passing minute felt heavier. Sophia walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You should drink something." Emily accepted the cup but never took a sip. "I almost gave up." Sophia looked at her. "But you didn't." Emily sighed. "If I'd stopped asking for that scan." She couldn't finish the sentence. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You trusted your patient. That's what matters." At that moment, the operating room doors opened. Dr. Michael Evans, the trauma surgeon, stepped outside. His surgical gown was covered with small drops of blood. Emily stood immediately. "How is he?" The surgeon removed his gloves. "He's alive." Emily finally let out the breath she had been holding. "But," the doctor continued, "he lost a tremendous amount of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical." Emily nodded. "What caused it?" The surgeon held up a small metal container. Inside was a tiny piece of twisted metal. "We found this lodged near his spleen." Emily looked carefully. "It isn't fresh." "No. It has probably been there for years." The old injury slowly weakened an artery until it finally ruptured. Emily looked back toward the operating room. "So he survived with that inside him all these years?" The surgeon nodded. Sometimes old wounds wait a very long time before becoming dangerous. Before Emily could ask another question, several hospital security officers hurried down the hallway. Behind them walked the same government team she had seen earlier. This time they headed directly toward her. The woman leading them stopped. "Are you Nurse Emily Carter?" "Yes. I'm Director Rachel Morgan." She showed an official identification card. "We need to speak with you." Emily glanced toward Sophia. "What is this about? You were the first person to treat our colleague." "Our colleague?" Rachel nodded. "The patient in surgery." Emily looked surprised. "You know who he is?" "Yes. But his identity cannot be discussed here." Emily folded her arms. "I spent the last 2 hours trying to keep him alive. I think I deserve some answers." Rachel studied her for a moment. Then she smiled slightly. "Fair enough." She led Emily into a private consultation room. 2 other officials remained outside the door. Rachel sat across from her. "The man you treated has served this country for decades. Most people have never heard his name." "That was intentional." Emily listened quietly. "He retired several years ago. But recently he agreed to help investigate illegal theft involving sensitive medical information." Emily frowned. "Medical information?" Rachel nodded. "Someone has been stealing confidential hospital records." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What kind of records?" "Military veterans. Witnesses under federal protection. Government employees." Emily suddenly remembered the stranger wearing sunglasses at night. The man asking about him. Rachel interrupted. "Was not family." Emily felt a chill. "He was looking for him." Rachel nodded again. "We believe so." Emily leaned forward. "Then why didn't your team reach him first?" Rachel looked down briefly. "He disappeared almost 2 days ago. We lost contact. We feared the worst." Emily sat silently. Everything suddenly made much more sense. The mysterious warnings. The fear in the patient's eyes. The words. "They're watching." Rachel continued. "We believe someone followed him to the hospital." Emily remembered the security guard's story. The man in the black coat. Rachel immediately looked up. "What man?" Emily explained everything. The visitor. The sunglasses. The questions. Rachel's expression became serious. She pressed a button on her radio. "Review every security camera. Find the individual in black." The response came immediately. "Understood." Emily looked at Rachel. "Do you think he's still here?" Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked toward the hallway. Just then another voice echoed through the emergency department. "Security." Everyone turned. A young receptionist pointed toward the elevators. "The same man." Hospital security officers immediately ran toward the elevators. Rachel's team followed without hesitation. Emily watched as everyone disappeared around the corner. A few moments later, the building suddenly went dark. Every light switched off. Patients gasped. Emergency generators activated several seconds later. Backup lights filled the hallways with a dim yellow glow. Monitors restarted one by one. Emily's heart raced. This wasn't an accident. She immediately ran toward the intensive care unit. If someone wanted the mysterious patient, this was the perfect opportunity. She reached the ICU doors. One security guard lay unconscious on the floor. Emily rushed over. He was breathing, only stunned. She looked inside the patient's room. The bed was empty. Her heart nearly stopped. The 4-line hung from the side of the bed. The heart monitor still beeped, but the patient was gone. Emily immediately pressed the emergency alarm. Doctors, nurses, security. Everyone rushed into the hallway. Rachel arrived seconds later. "No." She looked at the empty room. "They took him." Emily shook her head. "Not necessarily." She pointed toward the floor. Small drops of fresh blood, leading away from the room. Rachel immediately followed the trail. It continued down the service hallway, toward the emergency exit. Everyone hurried after it. When they reached the exit, the door stood open. Rain poured outside, but there was no vehicle. No kidnappers. Nothing. Only more drops of blood. Emily looked around carefully. Then she noticed something unusual. The blood trail suddenly changed direction. Instead of leading toward the parking lot, it went back inside the hospital. Rachel noticed it too. They're trying to confuse us. Emily followed the trail through another hallway, past the pharmacy, past the laboratory. Finally, it ended at a locked maintenance room. Rachel signaled 2 officers. They quietly unlocked the door. Everyone prepared themselves. The door slowly opened. The room was empty. Almost. Against the far wall sat the mysterious patient. Still weak. Still bleeding. But conscious. He looked directly at Emily. I knew. He whispered. They'd come. Emily knelt beside him. Who brought you here? He smiled faintly. No one. Rachel looked shocked. You walked. He nodded weakly. They wanted me outside. So I hid. Emily couldn't believe it. Despite major surgery, he had escaped on his own to avoid being captured. Rachel called for a wheelchair. The patient grabbed Emily's wrist. Listen. She leaned closer. They're not after me anymore. Emily frowned. Then who? His breathing became slower. You. Emily froze. Me. You saw their faces. You heard everything. Rachel looked around the room. Suddenly understanding the danger, she immediately spoke into her radio. Protect Nurse Emily Carter. Effective immediately. Every officer around her instantly changed position. For the first time that night, Emily realized she was no longer just a nurse. She had become part of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Emily stood frozen for only a second. The mysterious patient looked directly into her eyes. They're not after me anymore, he whispered again. They're after you. Rachel Morgan immediately motioned for her team to surround the room. 2 officers secured the hallway. Another quietly locked the maintenance room door. Emily's heart was racing. I don't understand. The patient gave a weak smile. You noticed things everyone else ignored. You recognized the danger before the scans. You watched people instead of paperwork. Rachel looked at him. Can you explain? He slowly nodded. The people following me weren't only trying to find me. They were looking for anyone who could identify them. Emily remembered the man in the black coat, the sunglasses, the questions at the front desk. They saw me. Rachel answered before the patient could. Exactly. A hospital technician suddenly knocked on the door. Director Morgan. Rachel carefully opened it. What is it? The security team found something. What? The camera system. Rachel frowned. What about it? It wasn't hacked tonight. It has been recording to an outside server for nearly 6 months. The room became silent. Emily looked around. Someone inside the hospital helped them. Rachel nodded slowly. I believe so. Within minutes, every entrance to the hospital was locked. Federal investigators began arriving. Computers were secured. Security footage was copied. No one was allowed to leave. Dr. Daniel Brooks quietly approached Emily in the hallway. I owe you an apology. Emily looked at him. I should have trusted your judgment. She smiled gently. This isn't about being right. It's about listening. He lowered his head. I forgot that medicine isn't only about numbers. It's about people. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. The important thing is that you learned before it was too late. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed hours of security footage. One technician suddenly called out. I found him. Everyone gathered around the monitor. The man in the black coat appeared clearly for the first time. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him was someone wearing a hospital maintenance uniform. Rachel leaned closer. Zoom in. The image sharpened. Emily stared at the screen. I've seen him before. The maintenance worker had been walking through the emergency department all evening. He carried cleaning equipment. He smiled at nurses. He held doors open for visitors. No one had paid attention to him, because he looked like he belonged there. Rachel immediately spoke into her radio. Find him. A search of the hospital began. Basement. Mechanical rooms. Storage areas. Parking garage. Nothing. Then another officer called over the radio. We found his uniform. Where? In a trash container behind the loading dock. Rachel sighed. He planned his escape. Emily looked disappointed. So he got away? Not exactly, Rachel replied. What do you mean? The investigator smiled for the first time that night. He forgot something. He held up a small electronic access card. It contains every secure door he opened tonight. Emily suddenly realized. He left us a map. Exactly. By sunrise, investigators had traced dozens of unauthorized entries dating back several months. The fake maintenance worker had secretly entered records offices, computer rooms, and restricted storage areas. The evidence uncovered a much larger criminal network than anyone expected. Over the following weeks, arrests were made across several cities. The organization responsible for stealing confidential medical information slowly collapsed as investigators uncovered more evidence. Several hospital employees who had secretly assisted the group were quietly removed from their positions and later charged in court. The hospital itself announced major changes. Every emergency physician would now receive additional training on recognizing hidden internal injuries. Nurses were given greater authority to request immediate second opinions whenever a patient's condition changed unexpectedly. New safety systems were introduced to make sure that no warning from frontline medical staff could be ignored without documentation and review. Months later, the hospital looked almost the same. Patients still filled the waiting room. Ambulances still arrived every hour. Monitors still echoed through the hallways. But something important had changed. People listened more carefully. Emily returned to her normal shifts. She never became famous. She never appeared on television. Most patients never knew what had happened that rainy night. And she preferred it that way. One quiet afternoon, she visited the rehabilitation center where the mysterious patient was continuing his recovery. He was walking slowly through the hospital garden with a cane, much stronger than before. He smiled when he saw her. You still notice everything? Emily laughed. I try. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a silver compass. It looked old but perfectly preserved. What is this? It belonged to my father. Emily looked surprised. I can't accept something like this. I've carried it through places most people will never see, he said. But it reminds me of something you already understand. She looked at him. A compass doesn't choose the road. It only reminds you which direction is true. He closed the box and gently placed it in her hands. That night, when everyone else followed procedures, you followed your conscience. Never lose that. Emily quietly thanked him. As the sun began setting over the city, she walked back toward the hospital where another ambulance had just arrived. Another family needed help. Another patient was waiting. Another difficult decision would soon have to be made. She placed the small compass into her pocket, smiled to herself, and walked through the emergency room doors without hesitation. Because real heroes rarely wear medals. Sometimes they wear hospital scrubs. Sometimes they simply refuse to stop listening. And sometimes one person willing to speak up is enough to save a life.